Thank you very much for joining in from wherever you've joined in to this panel discussion on measuring emissions, the Caspian Debt Approach. With me on the panel is Tiange Wei, the Asia Pacific lead and the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, Alex MacGillivray, the Executive Director of the Joint Impact Model Foundation, Kongkona Sarma, the Delivery Lead of the British International Investments Technical Assistance Facility for Financial Services, and Avishek Gupta, the Managing Director and the CEO of Caspian Debt. I am the moderator of the panel. My name is Sanjoy Sanyal. In this discussion, we will talk about the nuts and bolts of measuring carbon emissions. And I promise you, the way we have thought about this, we will leave enough time for questions and answers. So first of all, welcome to the panel. And I'm going to in the order of Tiange first, and then Kongkona, and then Alex and Avishek. No particular reason for taking this, of course. To introduce your organization in 1 minute. So Tiange, first you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sanjoy. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Pleasure to be here. I'm Tiange Wei from PCAF, and PCAF is an industry-led initiative and partnership to help to facilitate that transparency and accountability of the financial industry to the Paris Agreement. So we are the standard setter when it comes to Scope 3 Category 15 in greenhouse gas accounting language, and the initiative currently we have just over 500 signatories globally, and over 170 of these financial institutions have disclosed their emissions once or at least once. And I'm also very delighted to see in the APAC region we have over 120 financial institutions. The last part of my intro is more of a reiteration of PCAF's objectives, which are twofold. One is we do want to continue to develop this global greenhouse gas accounting and reporting standard for the financial industry. And the second part of the objective is this network or initiative. So we hope to be able to increase the number of institutions that use the standard to disclose their emissions to over 1,000 institutions worldwide by year end 2025. I'll stop here. Thank you, Caspian, and handing it back to you, Sanjoy.
Thank you very much, Tiange. Kongkona.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kongkona Sarma, ESG and Climate Finance Consultant. As Sanjay mentioned, I'm part of the British International Investments Technical Assistance Facility team. Now, British International Investment, BII, or as till recently called CDC, is a development financial institution, which is a development bank like there are all over the Western world. And they focus on investment, providing concessional capital to riskier areas and frontier markets. BII has quite a large portfolio in Asia, and India being their largest segment in their portfolio. And as part of the technical assistance facility, we provide support to the financial institutions in their climate risk, in their decarbonization journey, and also in financial inclusion. Thank you, and thanks, Sanjoy, for inviting us.
Thank you, Kongkona. Alex, over to you. And with best wishes for the match tonight.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm Alex MacGillivray, Executive Director of JIM Foundations. What is the JIM Foundation? So JIM stands for Joint Impact Model, and it's basically a toolkit all designed with and for financial institutions to help with climate transition planning. So the first tools we developed are GHG accounting aligned to the PCAF global standard. And we also produce a module that gives you an estimate of positive socioeconomic impacts, i.e. economic value added, and the jobs that are supported by an investment portfolio. And the most recent tool that we've added to our toolkit is a climate risk assessment. So we're about kind of 10% of the size of PCAF, I think, with 50 members in the financial institutions, lots of development finance institutions like BII, which is where I used to work when we made the investment in Caspian. I remember it very well. But then also banks and other financial institutions, all focused on emerging markets. So if PCAF is the the kind of nut, then I guess Jim Foundation is the bolt. And if you screw them together, then you get something really secure in terms of GHG accounting.
Thank you very much, Alex. Avishek, over to you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Pleasure to be here, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. Just to quickly introduce Caspian Debt, we are an Indian financial services organization. We provide loans or financing both on balance sheet and off balance sheet to financial institutions that do retail finance, as well as corporate small and medium enterprises that all of which work towards creating positive social and environmental impact across a number of sectors like food and agriculture, clean technologies, healthcare, education, water and sanitation, and of course, financial inclusion. We funded over 250 companies, 250 early and growth stage Indian companies till date. We are a 2x flagship fund, recognition given for our gender lens approach towards investing. And if I'm not wrong, we are also the first Indian NBFC or asset manager signatory to PCAF and the GIM, both of them. So that's us, Sanjoy. Over to you.
Thank you very much. We have about 70 guests on the webinar. We really appreciate your time that you came in. This is an important topic, and we want to make sure that we give you the sufficient time to ask questions. The way we have organized this discussion is that we'll have a quick 3 rounds of discussion. One is on the why measure emissions. The second is on the how, which is the nuts and bolts that Alex alluded to. And then, of course, how to use this data. Now, if you have done a first emission report, we hope to complete that actually in about 30 minutes. So we have 30 minutes of question answer at the end. In the meantime, if you have questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat. We are keeping an eye out on the chat, so do pop in your questions. But without further ado, Alex, I'm going to start with you on the why of the measuring emissions. Just for the sake of clarity for everybody in the audience, just get these words scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 out of the way.
Right. Yes. Well, I hope most of the audience will know that a financial institution probably in itself doesn't have a huge carbon footprint. It's mainly office-based workers, probably in quite energy efficient offices. So what in the technical language is called scope 1 and 2, i.e. the direct emissions of the workers of a financial institution, are not particularly high. They're kind of similar to kind of an accountancy firm or a legal firm. But of course, the big impact is the reason why a financial institution exists, which is to get money into the economy, specifically like Caspian does, to get money into the hands of SMEs and large businesses, startups, entrepreneurs, so that they can generate economic activity for the country and create the positive impacts that we all love. Now, the problem is, in a carbon heavy economy, all of those economic impacts create climate impacts as well, and India knows best, kind of from the recent heat waves, how serious climate is. So the reason why you want to think about the financed emissions is because that's where the biggest opportunities are for a financial institution in terms of taking meaningful climate action. Now, we all, I think, on the panel love businesses that are corporate, social, responsible businesses. You reduce your footprint, use energy efficient equipment in the office. But if you want to make a really big impact, then you're going to look at what we call the scope 3 financed emissions from your portfolio, because you can then work with your clients to find solutions to their challenges. You make them more energy efficient, you make them more effective as businesses, you get more business from them, you make more money. It's a simple equation, and it's a win-win equation. So and then the real beneficiaries will be everyone in the world, and particularly people in the poorest countries who are suffering most from climate change, they'll be the biggest beneficiaries of all of this activity. So that's my kind of, in a nutshell, without getting too much into the intricacies of Scope 3, which is, it's very, very important. And as Tiange Wei and others know, it's also in the detail, it's actually quite difficult to do it well. But there's no question that it's really important to do it.
Right. And Avishek, you as the MD of a non-banking finance company in India, I've worked with you for 5 years. I know that number of things to get your attention. But last year, you signed up Caspian Debt for this journey. What were you thinking?
Sure, Sanjay. So at Caspian Debt for a little over 10 years, we have been actively funding startups and companies and supply chains with a very high level intent of improving climate resilience in different ways, whether it is adaptation, whether it is mitigation. Now, while we were doing that, we realized that even supply chains that are not directly related to, for example, the climate technology sectors where we were lenders, or we realized that even such sectors were affected by the climate risks. And hence, we felt that there was a need to find a comprehensive approach that, in a way, helped us meet, I would say, two primary goals. One goal being to manage our climate-related risks better across our portfolio, irrespective of the sector. And two, over a period of time, sharpen or improve our targeting of financing of climate-related projects or climate-related sectors, basically sectors that improve climate resilience, especially of the lower income households or the more affected segments of the society. So those were the two primary goals. So figuring out our own climate risks and targeting our financing better. But over a period of time, we realized that there were two other bonus benefits. One was the regulatory focus. We realized that over a period of time, in fact, both regulatory attention or focus and availability of capital will lean positively towards climate conscious lenders. So from a strategic perspective or for a long-term growth perspective, it made sense for us to kind of make sure that we are aligned or we initiate this journey so that in the medium to long term, we are kind of well equipped to handle the regulatory scrutiny, and at the same time, we are well equipped to get access to capital that is climate conscious. So, and to do all of this, the first step is essentially measuring financed emissions. So that's how we decided to start.
Thank you, Abhishek. Tiange, Alex has already alluded to this, the importance of financial institutions to start measuring financed emissions, but perhaps you can give us the full big picture.
Yeah, thank you. I think I agree with what Alex and Avishek have already shared, and why is definitely the important question to answer. So from my perspective, coming from a big picture, if I have to share a few points, my first point would be on this journey to net zero, it's important to be aware of what gets measured gets managed. In fact, that's one of our favorite quotes in greenhouse gas accounting. So only by measuring the baseline emissions, so knowing where you're currently at in terms of finance emissions, and it is an annual exercise, which means you'll continue to treat it as similar rigor and robustness, just like financial accounting, and monitor this progress on the journey to net zero, because otherwise there's no way of knowing how you are performing against your net zero related goals. And if you can't measure your finance emission year on year, and you won't be able to adjust your strategy accordingly. So that is my first point. It is an important step on this journey to net zero. Simply by measuring and disclosing it, it would not solve the whole sort of question in terms of how to get net zero. But I think Alex and Avishek already mentioned this. This is just the first step. Now, coming to reporting and disclosure, this is still important, although it's not the solution to get to net zero, but it's the first step. Regulatory requirements nowadays are for sure emphasizing on the importance of this metric for a multitude of reasons. But like Alex mentioned, finance emission for a financial institution is significant. I think a piece of research shows comparing Scope 3 category 15 is almost on average 750 times larger than the direct emissions from office vehicles. So that shows why it's important to measure itself. And I'm also aware in India that Reserve Bank of India, they issued some draft guidelines on the disclosure framework on climate-related financial risk. And that is also important. It highlights the importance of finance emission as a metric that will help you to measure and also evaluate and assess your climate-related risk and opportunities. So that's my second point, sort of the reporting and disclosure perspective for transparency. And my third point is more on how coming back to sort of more from a picture to a corporate or a financial institution, how measuring finance emission can help you to further your climate-related business goals. So by measuring it, you're effectively creating transparency for your stakeholders. You can also identify the greenhouse gas intensive hotspots on your portfolio and manage your climate-related transition risk. And if you're looking for some financial institution, they may be looking to innovate or develop more climate-friendly financial products. And by measuring finance emissions, they can see the impact or maybe helps them to create some of these products. And last but not least, just looking at this trajectory to net zero, it is a good way to help to align the financial flows with the Paris Agreement. So I think these are my 3 points, but I agree with everything that has already been mentioned by my colleagues. Yeah.
Thanks, Tiange. Kongkona, Tiange said that, measuring emissions helps you on assessing climate risks and opportunities. Tell us how.
Thank you. And I think when Avishek mentioned, right, his goals for Caspian debt, that kind of, I feel that can be extrapolated as to why financial institutions should be measuring finance emissions. And coming from a DFI, we don't want this to be another reporting requirement. So that building the business case for us is important. And for financial institutions, this automatically translates to exactly the first part of this discussion as to why we are doing this. Now, when you measure finance emissions along your supply chain, what you're essentially doing is you're understanding a portfolio's exposure to physical risk, but also at a very granular level, at an asset level, you're understanding their climate, how they are impacted by climate. Avishek mentioned various sectors of his portfolio. And so being able to understand that risk exposure, climate risk exposure, helps financial institutions integrate climate risk into the risk management framework. Tiange mentioned about financial accounting and climate accounting. So from the risk side, the way I see it is if for financial institutions, risk management framework has to integrate the climate risk indicators to it. And we are actually doing it with other financial institutions like MFIs. Then the second point is about how do you then quickly translate these risks to your opportunities. And this is where understanding your exposure and understanding where your portfolio lies now versus where you want to see them. That journey into the low carbon sector or a low carbon portfolio will help you develop, say, climate resilient products. And it could be agri-insurance products. It could be it could also be for a certain financial institution like a bank. It could also be adapting to your existing product in terms of how do you tweak the existing term sheet so that borrowers are able to repay in accordance with certain physical risk that you have identified in terms of floods, etc. So that ability to link your finance emission measurement to your climate risk and opportunities and being able to integrate it into your business as usual is very, very important, I would say. And most importantly, and because there was this discussion going on about regulatory, requirements, which my earlier panelists also mentioned, that is very important because right now there is not much regulatory requirement, but as a financial institution, if you have started measuring your finance emissions, what you're doing is indicating to the market that as a lender, you understand the climate change, the impact, and you are able to integrate it into your core business of providing and allocating capital. So.
Thank you very much, Kongkona. With that, as I said, we've now close to about 80 people in the panel, in the webinar. We really appreciate your time coming in. As I said at the beginning, we're going to have this in 3 main sections. We've finished the why part of it, why measure carbon emissions. And then we're getting into the next level of detail, which is the how. And but if you have questions, put them in the chat. We have sufficient time at the end to take questions. So do put them in the chat. For the how, Tiange, I'm going to start with you. I think the best place to start is actually the PCAF resources and that you have made available. Could you take us through that, please?
Yeah, sure. That's a very relevant question, and I think how it definitely is a process. It takes time to build a capacity to set up the infrastructure and resources. So how can we support from a PCAF perspective? I think most of the participants or industry stakeholders are aware of our standard, which essentially is the methodology. This is in the public domain, and you can find them on the PCAF website and download and read. But we also provide specific resources to our signatories, so financial institutions that are taking action to measure and disclose their emissions. So we have an emission factor database. We understand that data is often a challenge and there are often data gaps. So PCAF emission factor database essentially is an open source database that contains physical activity based and economic activity based emission factors. What that means is, even though if you don't have the directly reported emissions data from your investees or borrowers, you could still be able to come up with a proxy using sectoral or geographical specific averages. So that is what we have. So the emission factor database is a resource to help everyone to get started, and is good for gap filling if needed. And the other thing, so besides providing some emission factor data, the other thing is we recognize the importance of technical assistance and capacity building. So we recently launched the PCAF Academy in 3 different parts. So that's going to capture not just finance emissions, but also facilitated emissions and insurance associated emissions. It is an online e-learning based platforms for all of our signatories to go through to become certified greenhouse gas accounting practitioners for the financial industry. So database and technical assistance and capacity building. We do have a dedicated technical assistance team that can respond questions when it comes to application. Last but not least, PCAF is part of the ecosystem. So we do recognize the importance of industry engagement. In fact, Jim Foundation is one of our partner. We have an MOU, especially for the developing countries. So this strategic partnership and being part of the ecosystem, I think it just helps to align the efforts and make our signatories disclosure process a lot easier. So these are my takeaways and points. Thank you.
A perfect way for me to ask my next question, which will be to Alex. Alex, you've developed a really simple tool. Congratulations for that. I think our audience will be very interested to learning how that can make their life easier.
Thank you, Sanjoy. Yes, and thank you, Tiange, for the kind of calling out the partnership with PCAF, which I think is working really well, and we kind of hope with Caspian's kind of pioneering leadership in India that we can get lots more PCAF signatories in India, and lots more people kind of really making a difference through this kind of stepped approach of measuring, disclosure, action, because I think it's really important, and India can and should be a major player in this. So the tool we've developed is a user-friendly tool. I hope Avishek and Sanjoy that you found that when you kind of ran the model. It's designed, I think, to kind of help people get started and to give as complete a GHG account as possible, while they put in place all of the systems that are necessary to become kind of black belts GHG accountants. And so the way I see it is it's a bit like building an arch out of stone. And to do that, first of all, you need a wooden scaffolding, and the scaffolding has to be robust and strong because it has to support all of the pieces of stone in the arch, which are the individual components of GHG measurement. And so we think of our GYM model as being a bit like a strong wooden scaffolding that you put in place early on in your construction. And then gradually you put in place the stones, the direct measurements with your clients. And then in the end, you have a full arch, and you can dare to take away the wooden scaffolding and the arch will stay. But what you mustn't do is take away the scaffolding before you have all of the pieces in place. Otherwise, the whole thing collapses. And so I think Caspian has very good financial and client data, and most financial institutions do. However, what we found is that there's always some gaps in the systems. And so what we do with our members is try and work out good practical ways. I think in India you say sort of jugaad ways, kind of practical, not too theoretical, kind of practical ways to fill in gaps so that people can get a good enough version of their GHG account. And I think, Caspian, you've just published your social impact report with that first accounting of GHGs and also of jobs as well. And then what's really interesting is to think, right, where do we find the hotspots? I think, Tiange, you mentioned the phrase hotspots. Where do we find the opportunities? Where do we find some problems? What can we do with our account? And then each year, as you refine your methodologies, you draw on the guidance of PCAF and other expert providers, you'll get a fuller picture, and eventually you'll have a beautiful stone arch, but it may take you a few years. So our tool is meant to fill in those gaps at the moment. That's the way we think about it.
Well, I really think the scaffolding example is very interesting. The Kongkona, we've heard from Tiange and Alex of the resources that are available, but I know you work with financial institutions all across the emerging world. And tell us a little bit of where do you think financial institutions really struggle at this task?
Sure. And I think some of it obviously is what my panelists already have started touching on: data quality, data availability, etc. But just to take a step back, we are actually the joint GYM Foundation and BII working together on generally raising awareness about financed emission in Africa and Asia. As part of the project, we are conducting a study. Last year we did for South Asia, where we reached out to you. Some of the bottlenecks or some of the issues that we are finding, first, of course, and these are for, I would say, financial institutions in Africa, in Asia, in emerging and developing economies. One is the data availability and quality, and I think that is the most obvious one. But I think what's important here is obtaining accurate data. It's important to have a lot of data, for example, to identify physical risk, but also to make sure that it's good quality data. And in the case of South Asia in particular, it is a bit difficult because there are no well-established systems. And this also comes back or is linked to the point about the way the economy is structured. And most of these economies, you will notice, are informal economies, which means that they kind of operate outside the purview of regulatory and monitoring requirements. So, and this could have been your experience in kind of understanding or getting this climate or GHG emissions data along your supply chain, because it's very difficult to collect this data and quantify because of the decentralized and unregulated nature. And this also is what I mentioned earlier, this fragmented supply chain. And because the supply chain involves multiple stakeholders, how do you then identify or allocate emissions to along the supply chain? So these are the kind of issues that we are seeing across FIs in these economies, which kind of is exacerbated by the technical assistance or lack of technical expertise. I won't say lack of capacity, but technical expertise, because it's a relatively new field. And you're talking of financial institutions, not necessarily the tier 1 banks, but tier 2, tier 3 banks, which we kind of work with more closely. So expecting a smaller fund, which is why the work that you have done is quite laudable, with a limited resources, kind of going ahead and measuring a financed emission. So that is another issue that we see, and where we as DFI are very keen to provide support to financial institutions. And lastly, I think most of this is linked to your lack of regulatory push. If there is no requirement, why take on this additional burden? Because it's not at all easy to measure finance emission. I know Alex has simplified the tool, but it's getting the data is a bit tricky. So these are the kind of challenges or bottlenecks we see in our experience.
And Alex, while of course we've used the tool, it's been great, the GIM tool, and it's been great. Avishek, I'm going to ask you, just give the audience some practical tips on the challenges that we faced and how we overcome them.
I mean, a single line tip is, become a signatory PCAF and join the joint impact model, because they're going to help you figure out the whole confusion. And I'm calling it a confusion because there is a lot of material floating around, a lot of discussions around this aspect of measurement of financed emissions, and there is this other world, other side of the story, where the lack of concrete data as well. So both put together, it's a huge confusion. But I mean, our journey, towards this started 4 years ago, and we've just taken the first step. So it is that complex, in my view. And for a small organization like us with not so unlimited resources, we had to figure a way out of doing this, because intent-wise we were clear that we wanted to do something about this. But how do you go about doing it? I mean, I did a few courses. I mean, and this started somewhere around towards the end of COVID, in fact, COVID years. I and a couple of my colleagues started doing a few courses trying to understand the overall context. But we were looking for nuts and bolts. And what we realized that most of the material or discussions are still talking about the whys. The hows is still not talked about enough, or people are not really there to engage with the hows. I realized that issues, I mean, one of the first roadblocks that I faced, and this was before we became a signatory to PCAF or we took Jim's help, is that, while we understood the full construct on how to go about measuring it to a great extent because of the, self-learning or certifications that we had done, we realized that emission factors was a big issue. And I remember, Sanjoy, for years, for probably close to 6 months, I kept asking you, where do I get the emissions factor relevant for the industry type and the Indian context? It's so puzzling. Well, how do you figure it out? The other realization that we had was there was this, there were a few databases, popular databases that existed, but, mapping them to the Indian companies in the Indian context, the NIC code mapping, those kind of things were very difficult, at least in the case of our kind of portfolio companies, because they somehow a lot of the companies don't fit exactly into the code. And I realized that the mapping with the codes was quite a bit of a problem. And while I know that scope 1 and scope 2 for financial institutions is not too big, scope 3 is the one that is a major cause for emissions. I have always been looking for an option that covers scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Unfortunately, we've still, at least I have not, or we have not found it as yet. So what we've done is made an attempt to measure scope 1, scope 2 based on our own understanding. And for scope 3, we've taken the help of, PCAF and GIM. And while we were doing all of this, one other aspect was that deep down or back of our mind, at least in back of my mind, I always had this worry that we're making these attempts and this whole area of measurement of emissions or even impact, broader impact for that matter, is quite, gray. There's a lot of discussion around what is the right way to do it. And I always worried, and I've always been worried that what if we misclassify something? What if we misreport something inadvertently, and unknowingly we contribute to what is now called greenwashing, right? So these are concerns that we had, and so having an externally vetted, kind of agreed by a large number of influential financial institutions, if we could get access to something of that sort and we could use that, is what came to our mind. And that's when we landed up with PCAF. And luckily during that period, slowly I think Jim also developed the tool, and by luck we managed to find a way to onboard, because at the reality was that unlike very large organizations, we didn't have the money to, for example, hire a consultant and get it done for us. We had to do a lot of the work ourselves. And but then there were all these challenges. In a way, becoming a PCAF member or a signatory and a GIM member or a signatory help us, cut through all the confusion to at least help us take the first step. Again, I'm repeating this, that this is the first step. It's not like it's a done deal. The journey forward is much more complex. And what I'm hoping is that by becoming a part of PCAF and GIM, that process is going to be easier and simpler for an organization like us, which possibly cannot afford, a large team of consultants to help us out and, get going in this journey. So those were the broad things, Sanjoy, that I wanted to talk about.
So we've already got a few questions coming into the chat box, and Alex, thank you very much for responding to them. We have one question on the regulatory, changing regulatory frameworks also coming in. Maybe when you talk about the next section, the speakers can touch upon this a little bit. We are going into the last section of our scripted discussion, if you may. The last section is about, now that we've done this, Caspian Debt has done this, how are any financial institutions gets it done for the first time? What happens next? What do they do next? So Avishek, you're not going anywhere. Now that we've done this, how are we going to use this strategically?
Yeah, so like I mentioned initially, the primary goals were two. One is targeting our financing towards more, climate positive companies or, supply chains. And the second one was to build a more manage the climate risks in our portfolio. So I think by doing this, by measuring this, like Tiange mentioned a little while ago, we will slowly start identifying the hotspots and then try to decide how we should build our portfolio in future, how to enable us to deal with these issues of climate risks on one side, and on the other side, kind of fast track or accelerate our push for financing more climate resilient solutions, or opportunities where climate adaptation solutions or mitigation solutions can be funded most. We could potentially design products that so second point is we could actually use this knowledge or guidance, simplify it, and help our portfolio companies incorporate some of these practices in their operations. We've been trying that, but I think by implementing this process ourselves, we can now go and tell people that we've done now, this is how you can do as well. So that will happen. The third thing, like I was mentioning, is that we could design products which could actually encourage, incentivize people to adopt these practices of measurement so that they kind of become more climate conscious companies, irrespective of the sector in which they operate. So I think overall, this essentially then in a way helps us identify partnerships with large capital providers also who are interested in identifying climate conscious or uh, climate resilient portfolios. This will enable us to build those partnerships, understand their concerns, and build appropriate portfolio through that financing as well. So I think those are the broad areas how we will strategically use this process. And as a first step, we are making the emissions data of our portfolio a core part of our annual social performance report. So we publish a social performance report every year. We published it for every year for the last 10 years, but starting this year, we've started to make it a part of our social performance report. And going forward, we are going to go deeper into that over a period of time. And like it was discussed earlier, essentially expand the disclosures, improve our targeting, and hopefully in the long run, improve the quality of our portfolio and business in the process. We will be sharing or releasing the social performance report towards the end of this session today. And we'll share the link with all the audience towards the end. We can talk about that a little bit towards the end.
Yes, and
Yes,
that'll be very interesting. Thank you very much. Kongkona, you alluded to the study that you had done in South Asia. You have been to, I know you've been just back from Johannesburg, meeting financial institutions. To what extent do you think this, our experience can help financial institutions across the world?
Absolutely. I think we were discussing this before we started the panel discussion. Just for the benefit of the audience, I just want to mention that we have this series of workshops that we are doing in this under this project in collaboration with the GIM Foundation, is to raise awareness of finance emissions and present some of the tools that's out in the market, including the GIM tool. So in terms of market awareness, one thing that really helps is a demonstration effect. And simply put, it's like either you say peer pressure or peer influence. So seeing a Caspian Debt take this step, bearing in mind the constraint that Avishek just mentioned, in measuring the finance emission using GIM, signing up to PCAF, is sending the signal to the market that look, it's not just the big banks, the tier 1 banks, but niche climate focused funds are doing this, and they can do this, and they are doing this. So maybe this strengthens our case of there being a business case for measuring a finance emission. So to that extent, definitely this is a case study which I think Alex and I've taken this to the Johannesburg workshop. And there is a question in your chat about trainings and awareness raising workshops, which we completely agree, and we are planning a second one in a couple of months. So these really help drive home the business case so that FIs start on a decarbonization journey, particularly in these economies when you know that there is no requirement. Why should they do this? And it's not just FIs. And it's interesting. What amazes me is that I see the kind of engagement that comes from these smaller tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 banks in these emerging markets. And what essentially I see is there will be one very enthusiastic person at the top level who drives this. In Abhishek's case, you mentioned signing up to certain courses. So that buy-in from the senior level, if you see, then you don't necessarily need like a lot of resources. You just need that drive, that push from that top management in order to bring about some of these changes. And this is just the first step. You're measuring finance emission because you want to see the risk, then you get involved, then you get the risk team involved, then you get your product team involved so that you can start developing new products. The And we saw in these workshops that is not just the Kotak Mahindra or the bigger banks. We had smaller banks in India signing up and following up because they wanted to know more about the GIM models. Similarly, in South Africa, we've seen not just the standard banks or the RAND banks, but we had smaller funds who showed a lot of interest in this area. The other section or a group of ecosystem actors who I thought we should bring to the table for discussion is the consulting services, because or the data service providers, because we are talking about essentially about data. And this is where FIs, particular smaller ones, need support. And usually, in some cases, they would externally ask for this support. So I think their wealth of knowledge is quite important to bring to this table. And therefore, going back to your point, Caspian definitely is for us a case study. And the fact that, if I may say, the GIM event we had in Mumbai, Avishek, was, I think, one of the key points for you signing up. For us, that is an excellent outcome for these awareness raising workshops. We want FIs to then move forward beyond understanding why this is important.
Thank you very much, Kongkona. I mean, it would be really nice to, as we talked about, to help build the sort of knowledge of the entire community. But Alex, this, before we go, congratulating ourselves too much, this is just the beginning of the journey, right? It's a first step of the scaffolding you talked about. So, just help the audience understand, how the data quality is improved. I think Tiange already mentioned that briefly, activity oriented, physical oriented. This is very, very confusing to a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly, Sanjoy. So, I mean, there's a couple of things. So I think, look, the good news is India's got the best data, right? In every sector, social, economic, and environmental. There isn't a data problem in India. There is in other countries, but not in India. The statistics are fantastic. So really, it's about applying them. And I think the kind of the more the Reserve Bank is engaged in the next phase of kind of capacity building in India, the better the results will be, because it'll be more grounded in Indian realities. And I think that's super important. There's no point using emissions factors that don't come from India when you can easily get emissions factors that do come from India. So I think kind of believing in the numbers, I think, is really important. This isn't just some exercise to kind of keep your investors quiet. You've got to believe in your numbers. When you go and talk to your 100 or 150 clients, you want to be able to talk to them in a meaningful way about their carbon footprint, their supply chain, their climate risk, and what they see as the opportunities to reduce their impacts and increase their resilience to climate change, and what role you can play as their financier in doing that. So I think beginning to link this to business opportunities will give you the motivation as an investment company to go to the next stage of improving the quality. And the quality of the data has to be just good enough to give you the insights you need to have a serious discussion with your clients. So I think in the end, it's all about engagement. And the beauty for Caspian is you can have those discussions one-on-one. The challenge for a big bank with 250,000 clients is, where do they begin to have those discussions? However, we do see examples of the big banks doing that, and PCAF kind of, I think, is the best laboratory for the big bank exposure. The one thing I would say is, when I look globally, I don't see anybody who's doing this perfectly. I don't see it in the UK. I don't see it in continental Europe. I don't see it in the US. And so I don't think there should be a kind of FOMO situation in India where you sort of think, we're starting from a low base and it's very difficult, and why should we have to do this? Isn't this a kind of problem for Western banks? Not in the opportunities there for everybody. So you might as well be the first people to get to really good quality. And if you don't have like a heavy regulator, you can innovate a bit more. And I think that in Europe, the heavy regulation is a kind of disincentive to innovate. i.e. people are thinking disclosure, we've got to do exactly what the regulators ask us to do and exactly not a thing more than that because it's too risky. I think India's more of a laboratory because you've got more of a free hand. And so I think you can make serious advantages on climate transition planning, probably that are harder in some other countries. So I know I'm sort of boosting things up here a bit, but I do genuinely believe that.
And I too genuinely believe that, Alex. I mean, I think in this particular case, I have to just add in my one word, which is that I believe that the perception that one needs to be perfect is actually the enemy of progress. And Tiange, I'm going to come to you to say the final words, if you may, or at least in this part, to say that, what are you doing to promote awareness? And we have a question around that as well in the Asia Pacific area.
Sure. I think definitely I echo that there's, in my opinion, substantial momentum and potential, especially this part of the world. And I've been with the APAC team from PCAF side for almost 4 years now. And more recently, over the past 1.5 years, I'm seeing lots of momentum, especially coming in from South Asia and Southeast Asia. So in terms of how myself and our team would be happy to support. So of course, there's the technical side in terms of continue to bring out case studies, best practices, database and existing resources and new resources, etc. But we are also now able to start to travel. So we are willing to have these one-to-one meetings when we are in the region, support capacity building events, webinars and sessions, working and engage with the regulators in different regions to seek that alignment and essentially bring our knowledge on measuring emissions associated with financial activities to different parts of the world. Just on the standard, I think I agree that the opportunities are there for everybody, and there are always ways to make it more to reflect the regional nuances into your disclosure and also the use cases of the finance emission or other types of emission once these are measured. I think on the standard, we will continue to bring out new methodology. So right now there are 3 parts to the 2nd edition of the PCAF standard, and we will develop new methodologies and continue to add that to the standard. And on the adoption of the standard side, I think, like mentioned, just to summarize a little bit, events, capacity buildings, engagement with regulators and central banks and international organizations, as well as sort of this aligning with different initiatives and be in the region more often for face-to-face. So we're very excited to see lots of participants in today's webinar, and especially those participants joining from the India region. And we definitely look forward to continuing the conversation and understand, please, it's 2 ways. So we do hope to be able to bring PCAF to your region, but we also want to bring you to PCAF. So your opinion and voice and comments are very important, that will help to shape our initiative going forward. And I think, if I may, just one final comment, which some of my fellow panelists mentioned the importance of stakeholders, service providers, and from PCAF side, we fully aware and acknowledge this. So we brought out this accredited partnership program with service providers, including consultancy, software providers, and data providers. So some of these partners have already been publicly announced. I won't name drop all of them, conscious of time, but I think we see the importance to align in terms of best practices to make sure those getting support from third-party specialists have the most up-to-date content and information from PCAF. So those would be my response to your question, Sanjoy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all my panelists. We do have one question. I think, Alex, you've been furiously responding to questions, so that helps all of other panelists.
I can't keep up with Jani, though. He or she is like kind of on fire. So congratulations, Jani, for asking all the tough questions.
Very tough questions. In particular, the question in the baseline scenarios. The one question that is, is the question around the insurance companies. And do Alex, you and Tiange want to take this?
Sure.
The
Well, I
question
think,
is, I'm gonna,
yeah.
we'll read out the question to you. Go ahead.
So I think insurance companies definitely already play an important role in providing climate risk data. And I think we haven't spoken much about climate risk, but I definitely see climate risk assessment as being a really important sister component to the GHG account. And in fact, GHGs without risk or risk without GHGs doesn't give you enough information to do scenarios. You have to have both, really. And so I think insurance companies already, and good examples in Europe would be Swiss Re and Munich Re, who publish and make available data sets on climate risk and natural hazard disasters and costs. So I think Indian insurance companies could definitely start to generate and publish if they don't already. I think in terms of kind of GHG accounting, I think the kind of actuarial science, but I also think I would sort of expand it and say that kind of professional services companies, other statistical agencies all can gather relevant data, and what we often find working globally is there's sort of something that you could call the kind of the mango question, which will be you have kind of hundreds of sectors covered with a database, and then somebody says, yes, but do you have mangoes? And you go, no, we don't have mangoes. Kind of, that's something that's kind of especially interesting to the Indian context, but can you do a study on emissions in the mango sector? If you do it, we'll quality control it. If it's good quality, we can add it to a global database and it will benefit some other people as well. So I think this community of practice is really important. And if it's right that insurance companies have the best mathematicians working in them, then they should totally be working on climate risk and GHG accounting. So that'd be my take. Tiange, you probably have you have a standard, right, for insurance companies as well.
Yes, thanks, Alex. I think I agree with what Alex mentioned more from a risk and transparency perspective. But for PCAF, risk is slightly out of scope, but we see the synergy there. And what we focus on is more on the quantification of that metric. So we, besides finance emission, which insurance companies can already do and use for their asset management and asset owning businesses, in terms of underwriting, we have been launching methodologies that we refer to as methodology for calculating insurance associated emissions. So how do you quantify emissions from those underwriting activities for commercial lines of businesses? So these are what we have been looking at. So I think it also shows that PCAF recognizes the different business areas within various types of financial institutions. So this is how we support and help to overcome that piece of the overall puzzle. Yeah, that'll be the response.
Sanjoy, if can I say one thing, because I feel like you can't have a webinar these days without mentioning AI, and I feel especially in the Indian context. So I think in addition to kind of all of the things we've also talked about, I really expect that AI can make a big contribution to generating up-to-date emissions data that's locally grounded and is, if you like, scraped from the very latest places where you can get it. Already there's an organization called Climate Trace that is using algorithms to estimate near real-time emissions. They have a fantastic website, but I think there's all sorts of other applications of large language models where you can kind of set these models to kind of go through company accounts and employment databases and kind of job sharing databases and learn all sorts of things in near real time that should be really useful to make this work easier. I'm surprised it's kind of there isn't more of it already, to be honest, but I think it will. In the next year, we're going to see the first AI tools coming available that are good quality and that actually increase insight in this space. So I think and obviously India is a leader in that space. I think also can make a real contribution there.
Absolutely. There's one final question also, Avishek, from Jenny. Jenny, thank you very much for making this a really interesting one. And this, Avishek, is really up your street. This is on results-based financing, on incentivizing, accurate GHG accounting, but I think also accurate meaningful GHG reduction.
Yeah, I think it will play a big role, and I think we are very interested in designing a product that does just this. So, once we are able to encourage or make it easier for a few more financial institutions to adopt these measures, at least for the financing that we do to financial institutions, or even corporate SMEs. I'm at least, I don't know about others, but Caspian Debt will be there with a reserves-based financing product for sure, because that's something that we've always wanted to do.
Yeah, and if I can add just a sentence around this, if it may, Avishek, this is Johnny. This is where blended finance meets emission measurement, but this is where emission measurement leads to identification of climate opportunities. The point that Kongkona was making, and Tiange was making as well. Alex, on your point of artificial intelligence, we need another webinar on this. We have to talk about artificial intelligence in using your new tool in climate risk, and the very interesting work that Indian companies are doing, including some of our own portfolio companies.
Well, let's do that, because clearly there's plenty of appetite for these webinars. So let's make it a series.
Absolutely. We have now people dropping off. It is 5 minutes past the hour. If I can request panelists for waiting for a couple of minutes, just in case somebody wants to drop in a last question before they do, or you can also just use this to say thank you and any last words that you want to have.
I want to thank Avishek for his leadership, and Sanjoy, I know you've kind of also helped with the nuts and bolts of this event, and I feel like it's kind of it's a good attendance, and some interesting questions. So I'm very happy to have been given an opportunity to kind of talk to you and your stakeholder network, which is great, and just kind of urging Caspian to kind of keep up the good work, and don't be shy of being a pioneer in India. I think it's great to kind of play this role.
Thank you very much. And Avishek, before everybody drops off, maybe you want to launch our SPM report.
No, thank you so much. Thanks to all the panelists and everybody in the audience who joined for the session today. Like we mentioned, Caspian Debt has been publishing a social performance report every year. The new thing with this year is that we took the help of PCAF and JIM to publish the first version of our emissions data this year. So I would request my colleague Victor to quickly share the link to that. If you're interested in knowing about what it looks like, my request would be to take a look at the report. Victor, please share. Of course, this is just a summary, more details in the report, but if you need any further information, please feel free to reach out to us at info@caspian.in.
Luda, thank you very much. Again, Tiange, Kongkona, Alex, and Avishek, thank you very much. It has been wonderful speaking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Yeah.
Have a great rest of the
Thank
day,
you.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.